Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Mike Asalas. I am the host here at the Max Revenue YouTube show, and today is episode 4 for Diary of a New Producer. Thank you for joining us. So, as you know, this is a series that basically gives you a look behind the curtain into the life of a new producer that's starting from scratch, trying to build a book of business, and I am the mentor. We're calling this producer Ian Cognito. But this is a real life case study, so we're entering week 4, so that's why we're going to be shooting week 4. And today what we're going to cover is 4 different things. I'm going to first of all start with kind of the numbers and what I'm seeing this past week. We're going to talk about some challenges that Ian is facing. We're also going to talk about meetings and what are good expectations to have in terms of number of meetings set. And then finally, we're going to close out with just talking about some common pushbacks and objections that Ian is getting as he's making his calls. All right, so let's get into this, folks. First, for the numbers, as you know, everyone, go watch the prior episodes if you haven't, but our goal is 200 calls a week. Now, this isn't something that's rigorous and has to be, set in stone in terms of if you don't hit your 200, you're failing. I think it's a good barometer that kind of pushes you a little bit, but not too much, and it gives you some opportunity to do some other things like maybe networking or maybe lunches or just learning about your new company as you're there or just doing some educational stuff. So that's why I like that barometer of 40 calls a day or 200 calls a week. So this week, Ian made 197 calls, or last week I should say, made 197 calls. So pretty much right there on target with where he should be. He did talk to 25 people. So that's a lot of conversations. That's pretty good. Now, this is the first week he actually set 0 meetings, though. He threw up a goose egg. I'll come back to that in a second. But he did have 7 follow-up laters. Those are the conversations where they say, hey, not right now, call me back, or next week, I'm just busy. And remember here, especially at the Max Revenue Show, but for me personally as well, I'm a big believer in celebrating the small victories because this is a tough industry, right? You're going to have weeks like this. That's what I told Ian as well as his mentor. I said, hey, you're going to have weeks where you set 0 meetings. Welcome to the club. His first couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, he had set 1 or 2 meetings based on just 8 conversations. That's why when you look at the data and the numbers and everything too, it always tends to kind of come back to what I've seen for the last 6-7 years, which is about 10 calls to have 1 conversation, and anywhere from 5 to 7 or 8 conversations to get 1 meeting is what I have seen be a good barometer, right? So if you're a new producer and you're trying to figure out what do I got to do in terms of numbers to make this thing work, and you want to reverse engineer it, those are good numbers to use. And that's why we have the 40 calls a day, right? It's all based around the numbers that we see work and work well. All right, so let's talk about some challenges that Ian was facing. One of the things that he brought up that I think is interesting is kind of has to do with cadencing, but this is basically what it was, is how do I work in new prospects and kind of phase out old prospects? Because he felt like after week 1 and 2, you're scheduling your follow-up calls with those prospects you're calling. Well, then you get into week 3 and you have a ton of follow-up calls, plus you're trying to work in, you're like, it's my 4th, 5th attempt, is it worth calling them? Plus I'm trying to call the new people. And so this was a big kind of a top of mind challenge for Ian, right? And what I told him is, I said, I got to the frequencing and the cadencing method that I did by subscribing to a company called Phone Ready Leads. I did a kind of a quick trial with them, but what they do is they basically take a parallel assisted dialer system where they're calling thousands of people, and they figured out of those thousands of people or hundreds of people, 20% answer the phone. You got to find that 20% though, right? And that can take a lot of time as a salesperson. So there's companies out there where you can subscribe to them, they verify your data, and they'll send you back the list of, hey, here's everyone who picks up their phone. Now, if you don't have the funds to do that or go down that path, and I don't think you have to, I think if you want to, great, it can make a ton of sense. I've dabbled in it here and there. But the whole thought behind that is, hey, if someone doesn't pick up their phone in 5 attempts, it's probably not worth calling them, or they'll never pick up the phone. And so that's where I took my 5 attempt method when I'm setting up my frequencing and my calling, right? So when I met with Ian in week 1, we said, all right, it is, let's just say it's August 1st. We want to really call starting for January 1st, so we're not working behind. Well, his first 2 weeks, if you go, 50 calls a day, 40 calls a day, and you're calling every other day, you should do that 4 to a max of 5 attempts. That should take about 2 weeks, right? So then you're working out that data. So from January, you're calling, let's say January 1st through January 15th. You're calling that data set of X dates on August 1st through August 15th. Then once August 15th comes, or right around that middle of the month, you should start phasing out the January 1st to the January 15th, right? Because you've called them now 5 times. And now you phase in the January 16th through the January 30th. See what I'm saying? So you're always working ahead. You're never getting behind, and you're phasing in the new, 40, let's just say 80 accounts roughly, right, per week. So if you think about it, per month, if you could do 160 accounts per month, prospects, and batch it in like January 1st through the 15th, you're gonna have 80s because you're gonna be calling them every other day 5 times. So 40, group A, 40 Monday, group B, 40 Tuesday, group A again on Wednesday, call your 40. So you see that frequency, how I'm doing that. And so that's what I told Ian. I said, again, like everything, this isn't something that like has to be done exactly this way. Give yourself some leeway, right? If you're driving and you see a good prospect, call them. That's why I like the 40 call mark, because you should have free time after your 40 calls to do other things. Work in new prospects if you want to work in new prospects. Do some research, network, right? So I think Ian found this really helpful, right? Talking through this. And I told him, you don't have to wait till the 5th attempt. If you have a gut feeling, follow your gut instinct. If you're at attempt number 3 and you're just like, this is a waste of time, don't set a follow-up call, right? Just get rid of that prospect. Delete it, or maybe put it out for 6 months, whatever you think makes more sense. So I thought you'd find that helpful. I know Ian did. The second thing that he was struggling with is sometimes, Ian's like, hey, I get down the research rabbit hole too much, right? Looks up a prospect and he tries to dig everywhere. LinkedIn, Google, Facebook, everything, trying to find as much as he can about a prospect. And I said, that's great. And this is not typical sales advice, but I said, I don't really research at all when I make cold calls. If I know roughly the size of the company, the name, and who I want to call, that's good, right? And what they do, class of business. What happens then is you can make a ton more calls. And what I've realized is on that first call anyways, cold call, I'm not really trying to impress them with the amount I know about them. Now, don't confuse this for not doing any research before an actual first meeting or research call and all the other meetings, but for just making cold call purposes. You're going to spend so much time trying to find relevant data, and you got to realize most of the people you're calling aren't going to pick up the phone. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of over-researching prospects. Now, this is where I'll get pushback from people in various industries, and that's fine. I don't care. I'm just telling you what has worked well for me. Now, there's rare exceptions. If there's a really large account and you found some article on it, maybe, right, or something unique, well, that's different. By all means, then go for that. Go do some more research before making a call to that CFO. But if it's not readily available, don't spend a ton of time. Now, if you've gone through 1 or 2 calls to a company and you haven't gotten anywhere, maybe then do it a little bit more digging, right? Again, this is why I like the 40 calls a day. Do you realize that I've made 40 calls a day in 3 hours sometimes? If you use a CRM system and you're organized, you're going to have no problem hitting the 40 calls a day. So you don't have to feel like I don't have time to do any research, right? That's not what I'm saying. You have time, pull up Google real quick, but just don't get in the weeds for 5-10 minutes per call, right? You're going to get out of your calling flow as well. And that momentum could kind of die out. And so if you find yourself not hitting the 40 call mark, maybe one of your issues is over-researching, going down the research rabbit hole, right? So keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about now what are some good expectations to have in terms of meetings. You guys, if you're in sales, you probably see the statistics, and you might have buddies that are selling a certain product and they're like, I set 10 meetings a week. Maybe they're in PEO or payroll, and you're like, man, I suck. I'm only setting 1 to 2. I got to tell you this, if you're calling true middle market accounts, trying to sell them commercial insurance, you should be happy if you're setting 1 really good meeting a week. I don't know what other people expect out there, but that'd be 52 good meetings a year. you should derive enough sales from that with enough revenue to hit your quotas if you're calling on the right size accounts, right? Now, if you're calling smaller businesses, those metrics maybe won't work, but it should be easier to get meetings with smaller businesses. So if you're calling true mid-market companies, and for mid-market, it could kind of be over the place, but let's just say businesses that are doing maybe 4 or 5 million in revenue up to 100 million, one meeting a week you should be pumped at. Now, if you're making this 40 calls a day, what I found is you're gonna have weeks where you get 2 or 3, weeks where you get 0. So you'll probably end up between 50 to 70 call meetings set, possibly. And when I say meetings, I mean actual meetings. Either over the phone you set up or in person. If you just have a conversation with someone, get their X date on the first call, that's not a meeting, guys. If you want to count it that way in your agency, go for it. However, I'm talking like you call them, you say, hey, I'd like to schedule a time to visit with you. They agree, and then you prep for that meeting, do all your research, and you have that meeting. So that brings up one other thing I want to mention to you. If you're a new producer calling out there and the people want to have a conversation with you right then and there in your first cold call, what I try to do before getting into it is give them an out. Say, hey, I know I caught you off guard. Can we actually just set a meeting, maybe tomorrow or the next day, just 10, 15 minutes? That way I can kind of prepare for it. You can prepare and you can get back to whatever you're doing today. I found this works better than having that first meeting or in that first cold call in terms of getting them to not flake out, right? Sometimes if you spill all the beans in that first conversation, they kind of heard what they need to hear, their mind's not really right, and then they don't ever follow through with whatever they've promised you. All right, so the last thing, and we'll close with this, is what are the top pushbacks and objections Ian's getting? I knew this would be the case. It's what I get, it's what everyone gets. It's, hey, we're happy with our broker. We love our broker. And just a little bit different take on this I want to share with you all that we talked about quite in quite detail is don't try to force a square peg in a round hole, right? People love their broker. There's other good brokers out there. Just understand that you're going to beat your head into the wall. But it doesn't mean you just say, okay, great, thanks. Now you can do that if you get that vibe, but just try this. Try just extending the conversation just another 30 seconds to a minute. What do I mean by that? They say, hey, we're happy with the broker. We love them. They're awesome. Bob, man, that's awesome. It sounds to me, if I'm hearing you right, like you're basically married. Yeah. We never really look. Hey, that's okay, Bob. I'm actually just calling people that are either unhappy or maybe curious, but it sounds to me like even if I did some due diligence and showed you that you were maybe even overpaying by like 20 grand, it wouldn't even matter, right? So you kind of throw it out there nonchalantly and you'll be surprised. People are, well, that's not the case, or yeah, we've tried quoting in the past, but it just doesn't really work. There you go, conversation extended. Now this isn't, some silver bullet, but it will work occasionally, right? So, anyways, don't get too frustrated with this objection. It's going to be the one you're going to hear the most. Just try to extend the conversation and maybe pose your question in the beginning a little bit different. It's why I like the due diligence, because you can it gets their curiosity going a little bit. And you could even say something like, hey, John, I know you got a broker you work with. However, I didn't know, do you guys, when you come up for renewal, do you handle that exclusively with one agent, or do you ever do any sort of due diligence with other agents, right? So there's some different ways you can get creative. I just thought of that off the top of my head to try to spark conversation a little bit more, but let's just face it, you're not gonna, make everyone a believer and make everyone want to meet with you. So just get past that in your head and move on to the next call. And you could drip on them, right? Stay in touch, be the number 2 kind of thing. That's all fine. So that's all I got for you this week on Diary of a New Producer. Thank you guys for all your eyeballs, your views, your feedback, for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button because we're doing this weekly and then you won't miss videos. And it helps support the channel. And if you found this information extremely helpful, we have a newsletter, we have LinkedIn, and we also have the Producer Playbook, where we get into a ton of detail to help new producers go from 0 to $1 million book that I think you'll find helpful. Thanks for watching. See you next week.